The problem isn't that you don't know what to do. The problem is that you don't believe you can do it. In this audiobook, you'll find a clear, direct guide to what many avoid. Real change. No empty phrases, no emotional makeup. 6 months, lived intentionally and relentlessly, can transform your life at its core. This audiobook is designed to walk you through exactly that journey. Chapter 1. No one's coming to save you. No one is coming to save you, and the sooner you understand that, the better. It doesn't matter how often you've been taught that someday someone will show up and change your life. That waiting is an illusion. What's holding you back isn't a lack of opportunities, not the system, not your past, and not even luck. What's holding you back is that you're still sitting there, arms crossed, hoping some sign, some person, or some random stroke of fortune will pull you out of the situation you're stuck in. But it won't happen. There's no rescue, no external redemption. No one will ride in on a white horse to sort out your life. And when this realization truly hits you, it hurts. It strikes at the place where no more excuses remain. It confronts you with what you've been avoiding all these years, that you alone carry the responsibility for everything that happens from this moment on. This isn't a harsh sentence meant to motivate you. It's not a provocation hidden in advice. It's a reality most refuse to face. But the moment you have the courage to accept it, everything changes. Because the same truth that takes away all your excuses also gives you power. And that power, used correctly, is all you need. As long as you wait for someone to save you, you stay stuck. You'll live the same day over and over, your frustration growing, even if you try to sugarcoat or repackage it. You remain trapped in a reality that no longer fits you. And the worst part isn't the situation itself, but that you've grown accustomed to it. You've learned to live with your unhappiness, and that is dangerous. We've been raised to believe that change comes from the outside, that the dream job will just appear at your door, that the right person will eventually show up, that stress will lessen, clarity will come, you'll have more time. But that moment never arrives. If you don't create it yourself, it remains fiction. And if you don't build it today, in a year you'll probably still be running in the same circle, with the same thoughts, the same complaints, the same wishes, which you again refuse to act on. Dissatisfaction is a warning sign. If you notice you're going in circles, if you feel trapped inside, if you feel you could be at a completely different point in life, then that's enough. You don't need another sign. You don't need a catastrophe to finally act. Everything you need is already here. You. People often wonder why they don't change, why they don't move forward, why they repeat the same mistakes. The answer is brutally simple, because they won't accept that everything starts with them. As long as you don't accept that, you remain paralyzed. Those who wait don't move. And those who don't move slowly die inside, even if they still breathe. You were not born to stand still. No one was born to settle for mediocrity. But growth, development, real change, all of that comes at a cost. And the price is responsibility. There is no shortcut, no coaching, no magical moment that will do it for you. If you truly want to transform your life in 6 months, you must choose it. And today is the day. This is the first big break, the one most people shy away from. Because it means you can no longer believe the old stories, that you cannot keep lying to yourself, that your job, your relationships, your body, your energy level, your discipline, everything depends on you. Not on the outside, on you. And not as a slogan on a t-shirt, but as a lived truth. You're the only one who knows when you go to bed, what you eat, what you decide each day, what you postpone, what you avoid. You're the only one who knows your excuses, your inner blockages, your doubts, your fear. And at the same time, you're the only one who can turn all that into strength. If you don't save yourself, no one will. No one will pause their life to get yours back on its feet. No one owes you that energy. No one has a duty to carry you. And that's a good thing. Because the sooner you accept that, the closer you get to your own power. Start by making it your project. If you want something different, you'll have to build it. With fatigue, with uncertainty, with small, uncomfortable decisions, and with absolute clarity about the direction you want to go. Change doesn't start with a dramatic moment. It starts when you stop waiting. Do you want to move? Then do it now. Not in 3 weeks, not when you feel ready, not when everything fits. Do it without applause, without spectators, without guarantee. True transformation doesn't happen on social media. It happens quietly. In the decision on Monday morning, in the promise you make to yourself, and keep, even though no one's watching. If you want a different life, you must do something different. There is no other way. And the difference doesn't start outside. It starts in you. In the moment you stop hoping something will happen and decide to be the one who acts with what you have, with who you are, now. Within you lies a power you haven't met yet. Not because it's missing, but because you've covered it up for years. With excuses, with fears. This power awakens when you become honest. When you look at yourself, completely unfiltered, and understand that the only way out is to move yourself. You don't have to solve everything today. You don't need a perfect plan. But you need this one thought. No one is coming to save you. And that's a good thing. Because now you know. You can do it yourself. And that's all that matters. Chapter 2. The lie of, I'm not ready yet. The lie of, I'm not ready yet, is one of the most elegant ways to keep yourself small. And it works so well because it sounds reasonable. It sounds responsible, reflective, almost mature. As if you just need a bit more time to get your inner affairs in order, to catch the perfect moment. But in truth, it's nothing more than a disguised escape mechanism, a neatly packaged fear of the unknown, of risk, of what might happen if you actually dare. We say we're waiting for the right time, but it never comes, because deep down, we know it doesn't exist. We create it so we have something to hide behind. And while we wait, life slips away. Not spectacularly, not dramatically, but quietly, in days that feel like repetitions, in decisions we don't make, in opportunities we let pass because we haven't granted ourselves permission to start. The phrase, I'm not there yet, carries a weight that feels truthful. But if you're honest, you know it's rarely about actual preparation. It's about fear of failure. And instead of admitting that, you simply declare yourself unready. That's more socially acceptable. It sounds better than saying, I'm too scared to begin. But here lies the problem. As long as you believe you need to be ready before you can act, you'll never start. Because readiness doesn't come first. It comes through action. You don't grow by thinking alone. You grow by moving, by trying things, making decisions, making mistakes, learning from them, adjusting, and discovering you can bear more than you thought. The truth is, nobody ever feels completely ready. Not at the beginning. Not when it gets serious. Not when the next step really challenges you. And that applies to everyone. Founders, quitters, reinventors, life changers. There is no moment when everything suddenly feels easy and you can say without fear, now is the time. The decision comes first. Confidence follows. And yes, you will make mistakes. You will feel insecure. You will doubt, perhaps often. But that isn't a sign you're wrong. It's a sign you're alive, that you're moving, doing something that matters. No one who created something great was free of doubt. The difference is, they went anyway, even though they didn't feel ready. If you wait until you have everything under control, you'll wait forever. And in that waiting, you miss precisely the experiences that would make you grow. That is the real betrayal of yourself. You prevent your own growth because you believe you must grow first before you dare anything. There are people who stay in that state their entire lives, telling themselves they just need a few more months, another book, another seminar, a bit more motivation. And suddenly, years have passed. And the dreams they once had quietly vanish because they never allowed themselves to start imperfectly. Change doesn't demand perfection, it demands decision. And the decision to act, even when you don't feel ready, may be the most important you'll ever make. Because that's precisely where your development begins. Not where you understand everything, but where you're willing to do it anyway. What if you stopped telling yourself you're not ready? What if you instead said, I'm doing it anyway, not because I'm certain, but because I know it's necessary. Because I know my fear isn't proof of incapacity, but a sign I'm leaving my comfort zone. You don't need a guarantee. You don't need others' permission. What you need is a start, and that doesn't come from long deliberation, but from a clear action, a first deed, a decision you no longer postpone. You can keep telling yourself it'll fit better later, that you don't know enough yet, that you still need to work on yourself. And that may all be true, but it doesn't change that the time to act is now. Because you'll never be completely done. Because life has no exam period after which someone hands you a certificate reading, you are now ready. Life works differently. It rewards movement, not intention. It responds to deeds, not good resolutions. And that's why you'll learn most when you stop waiting. You're not too early. You're not too late. You're exactly where you should be. But you may now choose to head in another direction. And you may do so without feeling perfect first. You may doubt and still act. You may stumble and still keep going. That's not a contradiction. It's the way. In 6 months, your entire life can change, but only if you stop hiding behind the idea that you're not ready. Because it's not about being ready. It's about becoming ready. And you only become ready when you start. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel stronger. Now. Chapter 3. Your enemy is your routine. Your enemy isn't the outside world. It isn't circumstances. It isn't the chaos of the world that overwhelms you daily. Your greatest enemy is much quieter, much more inconspicuous, much better camouflaged. It lives in your routines, in your habits, in the way you start your day, live it, end it. Your enemy is your routine, not because it's wrong, but because it holds you back without you noticing. It begins with every day feeling familiar. You wake up, go through the same motions, think the same thoughts, take the same route to work, speak with the same people about the same things. And as you do, a pattern forms. A pattern that gives you security, but also stagnation. And what you eventually fail to notice is that this repetition, harmless as it may seem, is why you feel empty inside. Routine provides structure, yes, but routine also kills any form of development when it becomes pure automation. When your day is no longer lived consciously, but merely ticked off, you lose yourself. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, in the small moments when you switch off because you know what comes next, and because it no longer challenges you. This isn't a call to change everything or turn your life upside down. It's a reminder that you shouldn't be surprised if nothing changes while you keep living day after day along the same tracks. If you yearn to live differently, you must start acting differently. And that often means fighting your own routine. Fighting precisely those motions that feel so familiar and safe, but no longer serve you. You get used to everything, even to mediocrity, even to that quiet sense that there could be more, but the timing isn't right. You get used to fatigue, to frustration, to the inner void you fill with series, scrolling, food, work, or distraction. And eventually you call it normal. But normal isn't a benchmark. Just because you're used to something doesn't mean it's good for you. It only means you've adapted to it. And that's what makes it so hard to break out. Not because you can't, but because you've long forgotten what it feels like to be alive. Humans grow through friction, through novelty, through situations where we don't know what will happen. And it's precisely those moments you avoid when you stick to your routine. You miss chances, not because they aren't there, but because they don't fit into your schedule. And the longer you wait, the tighter the pattern becomes in which you move. It's not about suddenly living spontaneously or discarding all structure. It's about consciously questioning your routines. When was the last time you did something for the first time? When did you last decide to do something differently? Not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Change doesn't begin with a big bang. It begins when you stop doing everything automatically. The most dangerous routine is the one you no longer recognize as such, the one in which you feel functional but die inside. You perform, you fulfill, you appear, but you no longer feel yourself. And that isn't because your life is bad. It's because it's become too predictable. You've stopped challenging yourself. What you need isn't more control, but more awareness, wakefulness, presence. The feeling that you're truly here in what you do, think, decide. And that feeling doesn't come when everything goes according to plan. It comes when you have to surprise yourself again. You don't have to change everything to change, but you have to start questioning your comfort zones, one by one, deliberately, consciously, because otherwise you'll keep running in circles. Otherwise you'll wake up one day and realize you spent years busy without ever truly moving. Routine is comfortable, but it costs you. It costs you liveliness. It costs you growth. And in the end, it costs you your potential, quietly, imperceptibly, day after day. If you truly want change, stop numbing yourself with routines that only keep you busy but no longer enliven you. You don't have to prove you can do everything differently. You only have to prove you're willing to question the familiar. That you're no longer willing to live a life that feels safe, but is empty inside. Because when you do that, when you find the courage to break your routine, not out of stubbornness, but out of clarity, that's when real movement begins. And that's what this is all about. Chapter 4. Failure doesn't define you, but avoiding it does. Failure isn't the problem. Not really. It may bruise your pride, scramble your expectations, hurt, yes. But that alone isn't what holds you back. What slows you down, what paralyzes you, what slowly shrinks you inside, isn't failure itself, but everything you do to avoid it. It's the constant strategizing, the endless, I'll play it safe, the perpetual self-protection against risk. That's what ends up defining you over time. Because eventually, you're no longer the one who dreams boldly. You're the one who plays it safe, who waits so long until every uncertainty is gone, and thus, never begins. And the tragic part isn't what you lose. It's what you never dared to win. Failure hurts, yes, but it's an honest pain. You know where it went wrong. You see what didn't work. You can learn from it, pick yourself up, come back stronger. But this silent avoidance, this I'd rather not try so I can't be disappointed, that eats you alive. Because you watch yourself betray yourself, day by day, a little more. It's not about romanticizing mistakes. Failure isn't beautiful. It's harsh, sometimes bitter, sometimes unfair. But it's also honest. And honesty is always better than the lie that you're safe as long as you don't move. Because that's not true. Those who risk nothing aren't safe. They're paralyzed. Many consider themselves strategically smart when they avoid risk. They call it planning, foresight, maturity. But what they're really doing is talking themselves small. They rehearse all that could go wrong, imagine how they'd fail, and then don't act. They conduct an inner dialogue with a fear that isn't real, only theoretical. And the tragic thing is, that fear, originally meant to protect us, becomes the foundation of their identity. You're not defined by what you once did wrong, but over time, you do become the person who systematically avoids anything that might go wrong. And that person doesn't live. He functions. He opts for safety. He chooses the familiar. He prides himself on being reasonable, but inside he knows something's missing. Failure isn't the end. It's proof that you're in the game, that you dared, that you showed yourself, that you took a stand, that you faced life instead of just managing it. And it's that attitude, that courage, that makes you grow. Not the result, not the applause, but the willingness to keep moving, even though it may hurt. Many believe they must build self-esteem before they dare something, but it's the other way around. You build it by daring, by showing yourself. I can fall, but I won't stay down. I may lose, but I lose on my own terms. I choose how to respond. And suddenly you realize you define yourself not by success, but by character. Because whoever never dares can never truly be proud of themselves. There's no self-respect without risk, no development without pain, no inner growth if you permanently shield yourself from hurt. It's paradoxical but true. Only when you're ready to fail do you become free. You don't have to want to fail. No one does. But you can stop desperately avoiding it, because what you lose isn't only the chance to succeed, you're losing yourself. You begin to build your life around fear, and the more you do, the smaller the space you inhabit becomes, until one day you no longer know who you are outside that fear. People who achieve greatness aren't fearless. They've just come to terms with having no guarantees. And they go anyway, not because they're better, but because they eventually understood that the cost of avoiding risk is higher than the pain of failure, that a life full of what-ifs weighs heavier than any honest stumble. This isn't about success at all costs. It's about allowing yourself to learn. And learning isn't linear. It's chaotic. It's bold. It's uncomfortable. And it throws you into situations where you feel uncertain. That's precisely where everything starts. Not in your comfort zone, but on the edge of what you believe you can do. You must dare, not to shine, but to experience, to stay authentic, to stay alive. And you must realize, every time you protect yourself from failure, you protect yourself from life. Because life is movement, life is risk, life is unpredictable. And that's not a flaw in the system. It is the system. You may fall, you may be wrong, you may find things don't work, but you must not lock away your potential just to prevent that. Because then you forfeit what truly matters, your own path. So don't stand still. Move. Not mindlessly but consciously, not blindly but determinedly. Be ready to fail, not because you want to, but because you refuse to betray yourself just to stay safe. Because when you dare, you're already on a different level. And that level has nothing to do with external success. It's about finally stopping building your life around your fear. Failure doesn't define you, but doing everything to avoid it makes you someone who never discovers who they truly could be. Chapter 5. Your identity is outdated. Your identity isn't fixed. It isn't a self-image carved in stone, valid for all time. It's a construct you've built, consciously or unconsciously, based on experiences, conditioning, beliefs, reactions to pain, praise, rejection. And at some point you began to identify with that image. You started to see yourself not as a possibility, but as a finished version, with fixed traits, rigid boundaries, a story that dictates what you can and cannot do. And that is now your greatest problem. You're living with an identity that no longer fits. Maybe you were once reserved. Maybe you got poor grades. Maybe you failed often, felt small, were underestimated. Learn to adapt, stay silent, not want too much. And eventually you turned that into your truth. You didn't just say, that was how it was. You began to believe, that's who I am. But you are not your past. You are not the product of your old reactions to old situations. You are neither the child who never dared say no, nor the teenager who constantly compared themselves, nor the adult who repeats the same patterns. Those were parts of your journey, but they are not your limit. They are not your foundation. They survived because you saw no better alternative, not because they're true. And yet you may still live by them. You call it character, but it's habit. You call it reality, but it's fear. You say, that's just how I am. But you don't notice you're trapping yourself in a cage you've long outgrown. If only you'd let yourself out. That's the paradox. It's not that you can't change. It's that you're not willing to let go of your self-image. You cling to a version that feels familiar, even if it makes you unhappy. And you don't do that because you're dumb. You do it because you learned that identity offers security. That it feels safer to define yourself with a few clear traits than to admit you could choose who to be each day. But that's where your freedom lies. You may rewrite yourself. Not spiritually, but practically in everyday life. You may stop identifying with old patterns just because you've lived in them a long time. You may shed a role you perfected because you thought it protected you. You may say, that was me once, but I don't have to stay that way. Many try to change their lives without questioning their identity. They want new results with old mindsets, new paths with an old self-image. And then they wonder why they keep failing at the same points. But how can you do something different if you still tell yourself you're someone who can't, who isn't worthy, who won't persevere? Change doesn't start with a plan. It starts with a break, with the inner courage to say, I let go of who I was. I give myself permission to become someone else, not to escape, not to reject the past, but out of clarity, because I understand growth is impossible as long as I cling to an identity that holds me small. You don't have to reinvent yourself, but you must stop limiting yourself. And that begins in small moments. When you catch yourself for the 100th time holding back because you believe, that's just who I am. When you downplay yourself in front of others because it's easier than standing up for yourself. When you sabotage yourself out of habit because you're unfamiliar with your own greatness. The idea that your identity is static is an illusion. You evolve anyway, every day. The only question is whether consciously or automatically, whether you choose your direction or let old patterns steer you. It's not easy to break free, but it's possible. And it's necessary if you seriously say you want to change your life. Because the person you want to become has no place in the identity that still holds you back. Your new discipline, your new self-esteem, your new level of clarity, all of that needs a new foundation. And that foundation begins when you stop defining yourself by your old stories. You may stand up today and say, I'm ready to become someone I haven't fully met yet. I'm ready to develop qualities that feel foreign to me. I'm ready to disappoint myself and surprise myself. I'm ready to define myself no longer by what I was, but by what I choose now. You will not be transformed from the outside. You will be reordered from the inside once you allow yourself to question your self-image. Once you no longer reflexively say, that's just how I am, but instead ask, who could I be if I stopped reminding myself of who I was? That thought alone is enough to spark movement, because within it lies everything. Your freedom, your responsibility, your power. Your identity isn't broken. It's simply outdated. You need an update, not a new self, but an authentic self that functions not out of fear, but out of choice. And you'll see, when you stop defining yourself by what you always did, You start shaping yourself by what you're willing to do. And that changes everything. Chapter 6. 180 days are not a short time. 180 days are not a fleeting moment you let slip away. They are not just a few months you flip past on the calendar without really looking. 180 days are half a year, 4,320 hours, over 250,000 minutes. Time in which entire life stories can shift, if you live it intentionally instead of unknowingly burning it away. Most people underestimate what 6 months can achieve because they're too busy focusing on what didn't happen in 6 days. They lose patience, believing change must appear immediately. And while they wait for the big, visible result, they overlook the silent shifts that have already begun deep inside. The processes that aren't loud but are real. The decisions that don't seem spectacular but change everything. Change is not a lightning bolt. It is a rhythm. And that rhythm needs time. But above all, it needs depth. 180 days are enough to set a completely different course, to reset your bearing, to break free from old patterns, not in theory, but in everyday life. And that's precisely why they're so valuable. Long enough to build a true foundation, yet short enough to maintain tension, focus, clarity. What holds you back today isn't the time, it's your idea of it. You believe it must go faster. You believe that if everything isn't different after 2 weeks, it's not working. But it doesn't work that way. 6 months doesn't mean tomorrow everything is new. It means today you start doing something that has an effect. Not instantly, but noticeably, step by step, honestly. And that's exactly the difference between those who truly change and those who only talk about it. Whoever is ready to endure, even when nothing shines yet. Whoever is willing to move through phases that feel slow, empty, uncertain, forms something within that lasts. They don't build a wishful image but a real version of themselves. Time will pass anyway. Whether you use it or not is your decision. In 6 months, you can transform your body if you take responsibility a little each day. You can redefine your mental strength completely if you consistently face your excuses. You can make financial decisions that change your entire environment. You can heal or end relationships. You can create clarity. You can close old chapters you've been carrying for years. You can change the direction of your life, not by a leap, but through 180 deliberate steps. But that's what most lack: awareness. They do something without understanding why. They move without orientation, and in the end they're exhausted, but not changed. Because they invested time, but not presence. Because they did a lot, but felt little. Because they waited for time to solve the problem. Yet time is never the solution. Time is the space. What you create in it determines whether it counts or not. If you're honest with yourself every day for 6 months, if you stop striving for perfection and start seeking authenticity, if you stop comparing yourself and start taking yourself seriously, then not only your outer life changes, your inner attitude shifts. And that is the moment from which there is no turning back. For there is a threshold you only cross if you remain consistent. And when you do, you begin to see yourself differently. You recognize that you are not the victim of your circumstances, but the designer of your days. You realize you have influence, that you can decide how you speak, how you think, how you treat yourself, and that therein lies your power, not in external results, but in the quality of your daily choices. 180 days are enough to prove you mean it, not to others, but to yourself. And that is the only proof that matters. Because if you stop sabotaging yourself for 6 months, you won't need motivation anymore. You'll be carried by what you've built. You won't need outside inspiration, because you'll know you can do it. Because you've done it. Not perfectly, but honestly. No one expects you to become a completely different person in 6 months. But you may allow yourself to generate real, tangible, fundamental change in that time. If you're willing to not only start the game, but see it through, even when it gets hard, even when no one applauds, even when you doubt. 6 months. That is the time in which habits cement or dissolve, in which thoughts solidify or weaken, in which you either keep telling the same story or begin writing a new one. Not symbolically, not theoretically, practically, tangibly. In every morning you choose again. In every evening you refuse to give up. If you look back and nothing has changed, it wasn't because time was lacking. It was because focus was missing. Clarity. The courage to stick with it. And that courage is not spectacular. It is often quiet, weary, uncertain. But it works. And if you allow it, day after day, you will see. 6 months are no eternity, but neither are they a fleeting moment. They are enough. They are more than enough. Chapter 7. Discipline is non-negotiable. Discipline is not a talent. It is not a predisposition, a character trait some accidentally receive and others do not. Discipline is a decision you make every day, or you don't. And whoever believes that motivation alone can change a life has not yet understood the principle. Motivation inspires. Discipline transforms. And it does not ask whether you feel like it right now. You don't need a good mood to set your alarm. You need clarity. You don't need to be in high spirits to do what you've committed to. You need a decision bigger than your current feeling. Discipline doesn't start in moments of euphoria, but precisely when everything inside you says, let it be. Do it tomorrow. Today's enough. Nobody's watching. It doesn't matter. But you know it does. And that is the point at which something within forms that endures. Many confuse freedom with spontaneity. They believe being free means doing whatever they feel like. But that is not freedom. It is impulse behavior. True freedom arises where you are no longer dependent on your moods, where you do what you promised yourself, whether your inner resistance is loud or not. Discipline is the decision to take yourself seriously. And that is exactly why it is non-negotiable. If you wait until it feels right, you will run your life in circles. Because there is hardly anything that feels good in the long run before it is done. Training rarely feels good before you complete it. The healthy food choice is not always tempting. Focused work is often not pleasant. But they all bring you closer to the person you want to become. And that is why discipline is the backbone of growth. People talk a lot about goals, visions, dreams. But none of it happens if you are not prepared to build a foundation for yourself. And this foundation does not arise from planning. It arises from repetition, from presence, from actions you take even when no one applauds, even when you are tired, even when the enthusiasm is gone. Discipline replaces motivation when motivation fails, and that moment always comes. It's easy to write a plan, easy to set big goals, even easy to inspire yourself, to promise that this time everything will be different. But it's worth nothing if you don't develop the discipline to follow through when the excitement fades. Discipline is proof that you are serious. And this proof isn't for others, it's for yourself. If you want to know how much you respect yourself, look at how often you keep your own promises. Not the big symbolic ones, but the small, everyday ones that nobody watches. The ones where you know, I planned to do this, and I ignored it again. It's not about perfection. It's about consistency. Not out of obligation, but out of integrity. Discipline is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront yourself, your inertia, your excuses, your patterns. It shows you how often you'd rather flee than act. Yet it also shows you what becomes possible when you stay, when you follow through, when you don't constantly restart, but build something day after day. Not spectacular, but stable. Those who develop discipline don't only change outwardly, it changes their self-image. Suddenly, you begin to see yourself as someone who can lead yourself, who doesn't overthink but takes action, who doesn't just want but does. And that changes how you move, how you appear, how you handle setbacks. Discipline doesn't just give you results, it gives you posture. It's a mistake to believe discipline makes life narrow. The opposite is true. It creates space, because it brings clarity, because it brings order to your thinking, because it saves you decision energy you would otherwise waste every day. Someone who knows what they are doing doesn't have to endlessly deliberate whether they should do it, and you can invest that energy elsewhere, in creativity, growth, connection. Discipline is not rigid. It is not cold. It is not drill. It is warmth in the commitment not to betray yourself. It is alignment with your goal. It is loyalty to the person you want to be, not only when it is easy, but especially when it becomes hard. And that is why it is non-negotiable. You cannot build your life if every day you renegotiate whether you'll stick with it. You cannot build trust in yourself if you don't believe you can see it through. And you will not experience real change as long as you keep the door open to stop again. You don't need discipline forever. You need it today, and tomorrow, and the day after. Not because it's easy, but because it shapes you, and because it is the only thing that lasts in the long run. For motivation sets you in motion, but discipline brings you there. Chapter 8. Stop being someone who tries to please. Every time you pretend just to belong, you lose strength. Every time you hold back because you fear rejection, you lose clarity. And you lose yourself, piece by piece, when you shape your life around how others perceive you instead of what is true for you. If you're constantly busy trying to please, you will never discover who you really are. It starts innocently, a smile when you're angry, a yes when you mean no. Constantly watching reactions around you as if your worth depends on how well you're received. And before you realize it, you've built your entire self-image on others' gaze. You make yourself dependent on applause, approval, harmony, without noticing you've put on a mask that wears you out over time. Not physically, but spiritually. Because wanting to please is exhausting. It forces you to control yourself constantly, to filter your words, to censor your needs, to soften your boundaries. You begin to stop taking yourself seriously because you've learned it's more important to appear nice than to be honest. And eventually you don't even know whether what you say or do is truly yours or just the result of an expectation you wanted to meet. You are not on this earth to squeeze yourself in everywhere. You are not here to be the harmless, well-behaved, always understanding version of you. And you certainly are not here to lose your life while trying to fit into every system, every group, every dynamic. It costs too much. It costs your authenticity, your dignity, your voice. It's not about being selfish. It's about being integral. Who you are doesn't have to please everyone. And that is not your task. Your task is not to lose yourself, not to contort yourself, not to make yourself smaller than you are, not to be quieter, more neutral, more easy, just so no one questions you. Because that will happen anyway. You can be the nicest person in the room. Someone will still reject you. You can do everything right, and someone will still find fault. You can strive to be never in anyone's way, and eventually you will bump into someone. And that is a good thing, because only when you stop constantly adjusting does who you truly are become visible. And yes, some won't like it. But at last, you will recognize yourself again. Wanting to please is a form of self-denial. You give up part of your authenticity in hopes of a little validation. But that never works long-term, because you cannot earn others' respect if you lose your own. You cannot hope for recognition when you can no longer look yourself in the mirror. Yes, it can be frightening to show yourself. It can be hard to say no. to set boundaries, to speak clearly even when it gets uncomfortable. But that is the price of inner freedom. Whoever tries to belong at any cost ultimately loses access to themselves. Whoever, by contrast, is willing not to fit everywhere gains something far more valuable: authenticity, clarity, respect, and a completely different kind of connection. Because genuine closeness doesn't arise through adjustment. It arises through truthfulness. When you show yourself as you are, with your edges, your thoughts, your emotions, you attract people who really want to see you. And you draw yourself back into your own life. Because you stop performing and start being. Stop asking what others might expect. Start asking what you expect of yourself. And stop directing your behavior toward looking better. Ask what feels right. Not comfortable. Right. For comfortable is often what protects you. Right is what upholds you. You don't have to be loud to be authentic. You don't have to polarize. You don't have to explain yourself. But you have to become honest with yourself. Because as long as you don't take yourself seriously, no one else will. And the longer you wait, the more you remain silent, the more you pretend, the further you drift from the person you truly want to be. It takes courage to let go of the role you perfected. It takes strength not to tie your worth to approval anymore. But this step is necessary. For your life will never be your own as long as you're primarily busy pleasing others. When you change, you will rile some people. You will lose those who only liked you as long as you conformed. You will feel resistance, disappointment, perhaps even loneliness. But you will also feel something else, something far more valuable: inner peace, clarity, self-respect. And that is a feeling you will not trade away once you've experienced it. You are not here to fulfill expectations. You are here to live your life, genuine, unfiltered, with backbone. And yes, that makes you vulnerable, but it also makes you alive, and that is what you deserve. Chapter 9. Quiet. You think too much. Sometimes the problem isn't that you know too little, but that you think too much. You dissect every decision, analyze every possibility to exhaustion, spin in circles with what-if scenarios that will never materialize, and call that preparation. But in truth, you're no longer thinking. You're trapped in rumination. And the longer you stay there, the further you drift from action. Your mind is a tool, but if you let it run nonstop, it becomes a brake. You try to secure yourself. You want certainty that you won't make a mistake, won't overlook anything, won't take the wrong path. But that certainty is an illusion. Life is not predictable, and the attempt to control everything in advance doesn't make you smarter. It makes you slower, more hesitant, more insecure. You don't need more thoughts. You need more silence. Not outside, but inside. That constant clatter in your head, that mental juggling of possibilities, that mental multitasking, all of it keeps you busy but not connected. You're online, reachable, active, but not present, not clear, not with yourself. And the more you think, the less you feel. You no longer sense what's going on inside you because you're working only with constructs, with opinions, with hypotheses, with memories, worries, plans that all crowd into your head at once without you discerning which is truly relevant. Thoughts are important, but not every thought is true. Not every thought is necessary. Not every thought deserves your attention. And yet you treat them all equally, as if they were meaningful simply because they are loud. But volume is not a criterion for truth. Frequency isn't either. What you need is an inner cutoff, a moment when you say, stop, enough thinking. Now it's time to feel, to act, or just to breathe, without analysis, without judgment, without immediately losing yourself in the next train of thought. Because what many don't understand, you can overthink yourself to ruin. You can destroy the moment, the impulse, the courage by dissecting it to death. And the longer you do that, the harder it becomes to make any decision. Not because you can't, but because you've learned not to trust yourself. Perpetual thinking is a defense strategy. You want to overlook nothing, get nothing wrong, lose nothing. But what you lose in the process is contact with your intuition. With that inner knowing that doesn't arise from arguments but from clarity. And you don't gain that clarity by continuing to think. You gain it by learning to be still. Silence is not empty. It is full of answers. But you must learn to endure it. Without immediately reaching for your phone. Without distracting yourself. Without seeking a new opinion, reading a new article, making a new plan. Sometimes the next step isn't logical. It's palpable. And you will never feel it if you don't dare lower the volume. Many believe they need more input to make a good decision. One more conversation, one more book, one more podcast, one more thought. But they don't notice they are already overloaded, that nothing more gets in, and that the answer has long been there, but they don't hear it because they're too busy thinking. Quiet doesn't mean passive. It is more active than you think. It is the ability not to immediately fill the inner space. It is the courage not to immediately react. And it is the moment when you stop overwhelming yourself with thoughts that don't move you forward. Ask yourself honestly, how many of your worries are real? How many of your thought loops have brought real solutions? And how often have you merely gone in circles without actually moving forward? The way out isn't to think more. It is to allow yourself to think less. To allow yourself to make mistakes. To make decisions without dissecting them 3 times. To move, not because everything is thought through, but because you sense, this is the moment. You don't need 100% certainty. You need the courage to let 80% be enough. You need trust in yourself, in your path, in your feeling. And that trust does not arise in the head. It arises when you realize you can act, even when you don't know everything. So be aware. Not every thought is helpful. Not every problem needs an immediate solution. Not every uncertainty must be answered with a mental endless loop. Sometimes it's enough to pause, to close your eyes, to breathe, to interrupt your own noise, because underneath lies something real, something you don't have to think about because it is already there. Your clarity, your inner voice, and it needs no proof. It just needs you finally to listen. Chapter 10. Detox begins with your environment. If you want to change, it's not enough to work on yourself alone. You can wake up earlier, eat healthier, read more, train harder, think better. But if every evening you return to an environment that drags you down, that makes you doubt, that pushes you back into old patterns, none of it will sustain you long term. Because no one can grow against their surroundings for long without wearing out. Your environment acts like an invisible operating system. It controls your energy, your attention, your language, your decisions, often without you consciously noticing. People who constantly complain pull you into a state of lack, even when you try to stay positive. Conversations that revolve around drama unsettle you, even when you want to focus. And if you have to keep explaining why you're changing, you will eventually wonder if returning to the old ways might be easier. But therein lies the mistake. You believe change is something you can pull off independently of everything else. But transformation also means recognizing what constantly sabotages you, not only within, but around you. And that means you must have the courage to clean up outside your own skin as well. Not every person who accompanied you so far can accompany you where you want to go now. Not every friendship that feels familiar is healthy. Not every family is a safe haven. Not every workplace is merely demanding. Some environments are simply toxic. They steal your clarity, make you small, hold you back. and you often notice it only when you gain some distance. Detox begins when you look honestly, when you stop making excuses for others' hurtful behavior, when you admit you have stayed silent too often just to keep the peace, when you no longer remain loyal to people who are not even honest with themselves. And above all, when you allow yourself to see your environment not as destiny, but as a space you may shape. You don't need to abruptly cut out your whole life, but you may start to distinguish. Who gives you energy? Who drains it? Where are you truly seen? And where are you merely used, fitted in, tolerated? Who inspires you to grow? Who wants everything to stay the same because your change makes them uncomfortable? These questions are uncomfortable, but necessary. Because as long as you surround yourself with people who have no interest in growth, you will always remain the odd one out. The one who takes himself too seriously. The one who wants too much. The one who becomes exhausting because he questions things. And eventually, quietly, you begin to hold back. Not because you're convinced, but because you want to belong. But you only feel belonging where you don't have to fight for your development, where your boundaries are respected, even when you voice them for the first time, where you're valued not only when you function or are available, but also when you change. A healthy environment challenges you without overwhelming you. It holds up a mirror to you, not to criticize, but to remind you. It allows you to be you and supports you in discovering the next version of yourself. And if you've never experienced that, it's time to start seeking it. You are not obliged to stay in old circles just because you once belonged there. You are not ungrateful if you distance yourself from people who drain you emotionally. You are not arrogant if you withdraw from conversations that dull you mentally. You are responsible. You protect your inner growth, for your environment exerts influence daily. It shapes your language, your thinking, your attitude. So if you truly want to evolve, you cannot pretend it's irrelevant. You don't need more willpower, you need less resistance. And often that means you need less of what you long considered normal. Don't be fooled by how long you've known someone. Duration does not replace quality. Just because someone was once part of your life doesn't mean they must be part of your future. And you may say that. You may live that. You may protect your space, even if others find it uncomfortable. Because ultimately, it's you who must breathe in that space. Change is not only an inner decision, it is also an outer consequence. When you truly change, who you attract, who you must let go, what you tolerate will change too. That is not a loss. It is clarification. And that clarification makes room for new energy, new conversations, new people who don't hold you back, but grow with you. You won't become selfish by setting boundaries. You'll become clear. You won't become cold by speaking up where you once swallowed your truth. You'll become conscious, and you won't become weaker by saying, "I can't do this anymore." You'll become stronger because you stop overriding yourself just to avoid disappointing anyone. It is not a sign of maturity to endure everything. It is a sign of maturity to know when enough is enough. And sometimes it is enough. Then it is time to leave. Not dramatically, not angrily, simply clearly. Because you have understood that your energy is too precious to keep investing it in constellations that hold you back. Detox is an act of self-respect, not a luxury, not a lifestyle, a necessity. And it doesn't begin with juice cleanses or digital detoxes. It begins with the question, what in my environment nourishes me? What weakens me? And am I ready to act on that? If the answer is yes, it will become uncomfortable, but it will also become easier. Not immediately, but noticeably. And one day you will look back and realize that was the moment you truly began to protect yourself, not out of fear, but out of clarity. And right there, the next step begins. Chapter 11. Talent is overrated. Talent is fascinating. It draws attention, impresses, creates expectations. When someone can do something seemingly effortlessly, we watch. We call it talent, genius, a gift. And somewhere inside us, the idea grows that this is the difference. That success, achievement, greatness, all of it depends primarily on talent. And if we don't feel it, don't see it, don't shine in it right away, we believe we simply don't have what it takes. This notion is comfortable. It explains why we don't even have to try. It protects our ego when we give up. And it fuels the illusion that some people are simply made for more, and others aren't. But that's a lie. One that sounds good but will paralyze you in the long run. Because the truth is, talent alone means nothing if it isn't trained consistently, if it isn't paired with discipline, if it isn't woven through with repetition, patience, and tolerance for frustration. What you see in others as talent is often the result of years of work you never witnessed. You see the surface but not the sweat. You see the result but not the process. Talent is not rare. What is rare is the willingness to stick with it when it gets hard. And that's exactly where it's decided who truly grows. Not in moments of excitement, not with the first successes, but where nobody is applauding anymore, where progress is stubborn, where everything looks stalled, but you keep going. Many people underestimate what they could achieve because they believe they lack natural ability. They see someone else writing, speaking, creating, and think it must come naturally to them. But they forget that most of what looks easy today was hard for years, and that every skill that earns respect once started at zero, without shine, without being taken for granted. You don't need to be extraordinarily gifted. You only need to choose to work consistently. And that's often exactly what the talented don't do, because they rely on their potential, because they think they have more time, because they're not used to things hurting. And then they get overtaken by precisely those who were long considered less gifted, simply because they never trusted talent, but trusted habit, perseverance, showing up every day. It's not about denying talent. Of course, there are people with special predispositions, keener hearing, a better sense of their bodies, a faster grasp. But that's only the starting point. No guarantee, no fate, and certainly no excuse not to try. If you truly want change, stop comparing yourself to those who had a head start. Compare yourself to yourself, to the version of you who no longer accepts today what they once took for normal. Compare yourself to your own endurance, to your willingness to go where it gets exhausting, and stay there. Because true greatness doesn't grow where everything comes easily. It grows where you keep going even though you feel incapable, where you're not sure it's enough, and you persist anyway, where you stop waiting for brilliance and start acting dependably. Not for applause, but because you know repetition is stronger than any natural gift. Want to get better? Show up every day. Want to grow? Do things even if you feel foolish doing them. Even if you make mistakes, embarrass yourself, push beyond your comfort. That's exactly where the transformation begins. Not in silently admiring others, but in loudly stumbling through your first steps. Be proud, not because you're especially talented, but because you dared to work your way through mediocrity. Because you didn't give up even when you saw no results. Because you're not dependent on whether something comes easy to you, but on whether you want it. The world has enough people who say, "I used to be good at that." What's missing are people who today are ready to commit seriously, who stop defining themselves by potential and start shaping their reality day by day, without exception, without drama. If you wait for your talent to reveal itself, you'll wait forever. If you hope someone will come along and discover you because you have it in you, you'll lose years. There's no substitute for work. There's no shortcut around doing, and that's liberating. because it makes everything possible, even for you. When you accept that, you stop selling yourself short. You stop stepping aside. You stop hiding behind the idea that some are simply born better. And you begin to take yourself seriously, not because you're extraordinary, but because you're ready to become extraordinarily reliable. Talent is overrated. What really counts is character. The character to show up day after day. The character not to quit when it gets tough. The character to prove to yourself that you're not waiting for what comes easy, but strengthening what was hard. And that's where your power lies. Not in what you bring, but in what you're willing to earn for yourself. Chapter 12. You must close doors. There comes a point in life when moving forward no longer depends only on the courage to start something new, but on the clarity to end something old. Not everything you leave behind is a loss, and not every open door is an opportunity. Sometimes open doors are what paralyze you, make you hesitate, drain the energy you need to truly arrive somewhere. We humans like to keep everything open. We like options, security, the thought that we could go back if it doesn't work out, that we don't have to commit, that everything is still possible. But this constant openness is what makes you unfocused, restless, and unclear. It's as if you stand with one foot in the present and the other in a past you long wanted to overcome, but haven't dared to finally let go of. You must close doors, not because you're bitter, but because you've grown, because you've recognized that you can't live in all directions at once, because it's not courageous to keep everything barely afloat, but weakening. What you don't finish, you drag along, and what you drag with you costs strength. And that strength is exactly what you need where you want to go. It's not about cutting things off radically. It's about conscious decisions, about clearing away connections that are no longer real, stories that are long over but still take up space inside you, roles you still play even though they no longer fit. It's about looking honestly and allowing yourself to make peace with something so you can move forward without being stuck inside. Because that's exactly what blocks most people. Not new beginnings, but the failure to finish, the half-hearted goodbyes, the emotional dodging, the excuses explaining why you haven't let go. But the truth is, you won't move forward because you're still holding on inside to something that's no longer there. Only the door remains open. You don't have to explain to anyone why you're stepping back. You don't have to justify yourself when you feel something no longer belongs to you. You can end things quietly, clearly, honestly. You can stop investing in connections that only remain out of habit. You can break it off, not out of anger, but out of truth. And yes, there will be people who don't understand, who accuse you of emotional coldness, who remind you how it used to be, who want to guilt you or thank you. But you don't owe anyone your staying put, especially not yourself. You owe yourself movement, clarity, lightness. And sometimes that only begins when you finally allow yourself to close the doors that hold you back. It's not just about people. It's also about places, habits, projects, dreams you once had, but now only drag along because you feel you must finish them, even though you know they no longer fulfill you. It's not failure to leave. It's maturity. The ability to say, that was part of my journey, but it's no longer my path. As long as you don't dare to let go completely, you'll never really arrive where you want to go. You'll stay torn between the old and the new, between obligation and self-respect, between past and future. And in that torn state, you lose yourself. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually, in moments of inner unrest, quiet doubts, a vague unease you can't quite name, but deep down you know why. You want change? Then start creating space. And space isn't made by adding things. Space is made by subtracting, by daring to leave gaps, by ending what takes up too much room and gives too little. And yes, it will hurt sometimes. Yes, there will be moments when you wonder if you're being too harsh too radical, too decisive. But then remember how you felt when you left everything open. How sluggish life felt when you held on and tried to move forward at the same time. You must close doors, not all at once. But those you know won't take you further. Those you keep open out of fear. Those that only remind you of a version of yourself you've already left behind. You can say goodbye to the person you were before you were ready to move on. And when you do, when you finally start to finish things consciously, you'll feel something you might have forgotten. Space, freedom, strength. The feeling of no longer having to carry everything with you. And suddenly there's room for new things, for clarity, for you. Chapter 13. Pain can be a driving force if you let it. Pain doesn't want to take anything from you. It wants to wake you up. And even if it feels like it's tearing you apart or breaking something inside you, pain doesn't come to destroy you. It comes because something inside you wants to be understood, because something needs to be seen, because something can no longer be ignored. Most people flee from pain. They numb it, push it away, pretend it isn't there. And that may work in the short term. A little distraction, a little suppression, a few good excuses for why you don't have time to face it right now. But what you don't feel remains. What you don't face grows. And at some point it will come to define you, not loudly, but relentlessly. If you want to change, if you really want to walk new paths, you must stop seeing pain as the enemy. You must begin to understand it as a signal. Not every pain is destructive. Not every pain is a punishment. Sometimes it's the only honest thing you still feel in a situation. Sometimes it's proof that something inside you is still alive, something that wants to be seen. Because pain shows you where you've gone beyond your limits, where you kept silent too long, where you betrayed yourself to please others, where you made yourself small when you should have stood up. It's often uncomfortably clear, but you need that clarity, because it forces you not to pretend everything's okay, because it forces you to decide, will you remain in the role where you suffer, or will you finally start to change something? And here something crucial happens. The moment you stop fighting pain is the moment you begin to use it. You don't transform it by force, but by attitude. You turn anger into clarity, grief into depth, disappointment into a new boundary. You take what almost destroyed you and build your next step from it. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was necessary. This is not romanticizing suffering. Pain isn't noble. It's raw, honest, sometimes brutal. But it's also an access point to yourself, to your values, to your deepest core. You can choose to ignore it, and you'll grow cynical. Or you can feel it, let it flow through you, and build something from it that holds. Many of the people who speak most clearly today, who have the strongest presence, who stand most convincingly, didn't get there because everything came easily. They got there because they had to go through something. Because they could no longer ignore their pain. Because at some point they stopped being ashamed of having suffered and started transforming it. Your pain is not your weakness. It's your material, not to define you, but to lift you up. You don't have to stay stuck in it. You don't have to glorify it, but you may give it a place, a genuine place. One that helps you understand why you felt lost for so long and how to find yourself again. There's a difference between victimhood and responsibility. Victims stay in pain because they believe it's all they have left. People who take responsibility go through it because they know there's more. Not immediately, not easily, but real. And the more you dare to look, the stronger you become. Not because you pretend everything's fine, but because you've learned you don't break when you feel it. You may be angry, you may be sad, you may be disappointed, but you mustn't let that pain paralyze you. Let it hold you back. Tell you there's no point, because in that state, You hand over the steering wheel, and you need it. You need control, not over what happened, but over what you make of it. What happened to you may not have been your fault, but what you do with it now is up to you. You can shape bitterness from what hurt, or drive. You can hide behind injuries, or grow through them. You can say, I am this way because it was hard. Or you can say, I am this way because I pushed through. And when you do that, when you no longer shove your pain aside but transform it into energy, something remarkable happens. You become clearer. You become more uncompromising about what serves you. You become braver at saying no, and you become more sensitive, not weaker, but more aware. You feel more deeply what you won't accept again and what you need now to move forward. This path isn't easy, but it's real, and it doesn't lead you away from yourself, but back to yourself. So if you're right in the middle of pain, don't think you failed. You're on the way. And if you learn to use that pain, if you stop treating it as an enemy and start seeing it as guidance, you won't just heal. You'll transform. Chapter 14. Do it anyway, even when you're afraid. There are things in life you'll never fully control. Situations that overwhelm you. Decisions that feel too big. Paths where you can't see a single step because the fog is so thick you don't even know if you're moving. And in exactly those moments, fear arrives. And with it, the voices in your head that slow you down, that warn you, talk you down, try to persuade you to wait, for safety, for clarity, for the perfect moment. But that moment never comes, and the fear doesn't go away. It stays, and you must learn to walk with it, because courage isn't a state that ever kicks in once you've thought long enough. Courage is what happens when you move even though the fear is still there, when you don't wait for it to disappear, but carry it along. When you look at it, acknowledge it, but no longer let it drive you. Many people believe they must feel strong before they dare something. They wait for inner calm, for that secure feeling. Now is the right moment. And they don't realize they're losing years, not because they lack ability, but because they never learned that fear isn't a stop sign, but a start signal. Not always. But when you feel that behind the fear, something is waiting that's bigger than what you think you can handle in the moment, you must do it anyway. Even if your hands shake, even if your heart races, even if your thoughts scream that you should wait a little longer, you must go. Not blindly, not recklessly, but resolutely. Because if you only ever start when everything is safe, you'll stand still your whole life. Fear is an instinct. It wants to protect you. And yes, sometimes it's justified. But often, it's just an echo, a leftover from old experiences, old wounds, old ideas about who you are and what you can do. And that echo is loud, but not wise. It doesn't want you to grow. It wants you to survive. But you're not here just to survive. You're here to live. And living means taking risks. It means showing yourself. It means making mistakes, being wrong, learning, growing. No one who's achieved something meaningful was free of fear. The difference isn't in the feeling. The difference is in the behavior. In the willingness not to wait for doubt to stop, but to act despite it. You can be afraid and still move forward. You can feel unsure and still decide. You can tremble inside and still say, I'm doing this now. And it's in those very moments when you resist your inner impulse and move anyway that your self-confidence grows. Not because you feel big, but because you take yourself seriously. Many wait for confidence before they begin. But confidence only comes through doing. You don't get it by thinking. You get it when you experience yourself, in action, in doubt, in chaos. And then, eventually, you realize you won't break from it, that you can endure, that you're capable of more than you thought. And with every step you take anyway, the fear shrinks. Not because it disappears, but because you become bigger. Do it. Even if you don't feel ready. Even if your mind gives you every reason to stop. Even if you don't fully believe in yourself yet. Because you don't have to start perfectly. You just have to start. And you'll never be ready if you wait for everything to feel good. Some things only start to feel right once you're already doing them. You may make mistakes. You may be nervous. You may feel overwhelmed. But you mustn't keep holding yourself back just because you learn to see fear as an obstacle. It's a sign that you're moving, that you're on your way, that something bigger than your old self is growing inside. Fear will remain in new situations, on new levels, but you'll handle it differently. You'll feel it, you'll acknowledge it, but you won't identify with it anymore. And that changes everything, because suddenly you don't need a guarantee, no backup plan, no what if it fails. You go anyway. And that's the moment things shift, inside you and around you. If you wait, you'll never find out who you could become if you dared. And if you dare, you'll never again believe that fear proves limits. It's a crossing. It's the gate. And you go through it, not because you're strong, but because you decided not to keep yourself small. Do it. Not later. Not someday. Now. Even with the fear. Especially with the fear. Because it shows you you're on the right path. Chapter 15. Your word must mean something. It starts with the small things. With the moment you promise yourself you'll get up earlier tomorrow, and yet you hit snooze again. With, I'll start next week, and from tomorrow I'll eat healthier. Words you no longer truly mean when you say them. And every time you break a promise to yourself, something happens. You lose trust, not in the world, but in yourself. Most people think what they say to themselves is private, that it doesn't matter if they keep their own commitments as long as no one else knows. But that's where the mistake lies. Because you hear it. You notice everything. Every time you lie to yourself, you know it. You feel it. And over time, that changes something in you. Not abruptly, but deeply. You begin to stop believing yourself. And when you can't believe yourself, every change becomes a burden. Because how do you build discipline if your own words mean nothing to you? How do you motivate yourself when deep down you know you didn't do it yesterday, even though you promised yourself? Change doesn't start with motivation. It starts with reliability, with the ability to feel your own word as binding. Not for others, for yourself. Your word must mean something. Not because you're perfect, but because you're serious. Because you're no longer content to constantly disappoint yourself. It's not about never failing. It's about no longer treating self-betrayal as normal. Trust isn't just a matter between people. It's also an attitude you develop toward yourself. If you break your own commitments too often, you become someone who can't lead themselves. You start making excuses, soothing yourself, sugarcoating things, and eventually you call that reality. But in truth, you've simply stopped taking yourself seriously. Reliability doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts where you recognize that your inner dialogue matters, that it makes a difference whether you can say to yourself, I followed through. I got up even when I was tired. I kept going when no one was watching. And that difference isn't loud. It's quiet, but it changes how you feel when you look in the mirror. It's not about being tough. It's about being honest. If you make a commitment to yourself, then go for it. And if you fail, own it. But don't pretend you never said it. Don't invent excuses, a new goal, a new start date just to distract yourself from the disappointment. Allow yourself to take responsibility, not out of pressure, but out of respect. Because every person who is inwardly strong doesn't simply have more willpower. They have a different relationship to their word. They know, if I say it, I mean it. And if I mean it, I act on it. And that's why over time they become someone you can count on, not because they never fall, but because they stay honest, because they don't keep making exceptions for themselves. If you want something to change, start with your language. Start with what you promise yourself. And check it, not outwardly, but inwardly. Feel, do you really mean it? Or are you just saying it because it sounds good in the moment? Because you're briefly motivated? Because you want to feel better without really being ready to do the work? Speak less, but speak truer. And when you say something, do it. Not perfectly, not brilliantly, but completely. Because the more often you do that, the stronger your foundation becomes. You won't need to push yourself so hard when your body and mind have learned, if I say it, it happens. This isn't a harsh lifestyle. It's clarity. And clarity makes life easier. It saves energy. It saves arguments, especially with yourself. You become calmer because you no longer mistrust yourself. You become more focused because you don't have to renegotiate every day whether you'll stick with it or not. And you become freer because you know you have the ability to follow through on your own word. Not the impulse, not the mood, not the pressure, but what you promised yourself. And that is the power that truly supports you. Chapter 16. Turn off the noise. Focus yourself. It's not that you don't have enough time. It's not even that you don't know what to do. The real problem is that you no longer hear yourself, because everything around you is loud, because everything demands your attention at once. News, opinions, reels, updates, people, expectations, and eventually you don't even notice how much you're losing yourself. Not because you don't want to concentrate, but because you don't even know what focus feels like anymore. We live in a world that constantly suggests you could do everything at once. Multitasking is celebrated. Being reachable is the norm. And if you don't keep up, you seem old-fashioned or left behind. But the more you scatter yourself across everything, the less of you remains. You hop between tasks, between conversations, between tabs, and by the end of the day, you've hardly accomplished anything truly meaningful. You're busy but not productive, full yet empty. Today, focus is an act of resistance. It's the decision to purposefully work against the constant din. It's reclaiming your attention, not for others, not for prestige, but for yourself, for what truly matters to you, for what doesn't shout but carries weight. And to achieve that, you must get radical. You have to dare to switch off the noise before it fully controls you. You must dare to create spaces where you don't consume, but produce. Where you don't react, but choose your direction. Where you can feel again that your thinking can have depth, but only if you stop interrupting it permanently. Many claim they're easily distracted, but what they're really doing is never fully being with themselves. They let every external impulse yank them away, and they don't notice how much they dissolve from the inside. Because without focus, there is no depth. Without focus, everything stays at the surface. And that very superficiality breeds the emptiness that feels like chronic discontent. Focus doesn't begin with the task. Focus begins with the decision. What truly matters to me? Not today, not for a moment, but in the long run. And what am I willing to sacrifice for it to have room? Because that's exactly what it comes down to. You can't do everything. You can't be everywhere at once. When you focus, you automatically say no to 100 other things. And that no is uncomfortable, especially if you're used to responding to everything. But that no holds your power. It separates. It clarifies. It creates depth. And it makes you tangible again. You won't grow if you do everything a little. You won't move forward if you keep letting yourself be pulled away. The truly decisive things happen in silence, in repetition, in concentration. And that only works if you learn to turn down the outside world. That doesn't mean isolating yourself from the world. It means prioritizing your connection with yourself. Not starting your mornings with your phone. Not constantly scattering your attention. Not giving your time to the algorithm, but to your vision. Because that's what focus really is. The conscious choice to stay with yourself even when everything around you wants otherwise. And yes, it'll be tough at first. Your mind craves variety, small dopamine kicks, distraction. But you are not your impulses. You are the one who can steer them, if you choose to. Start by creating spaces where nothing calls your name. No screen, no messages, no feed. Spaces where you learn to stick with one thought, one task, one idea. Not because it's easy, but because it makes you whole again. Because that's what focus does. You come back to yourself. You notice what truly occupies you, what you really want, what you've buried because you couldn't hear it over all the noise. And that moment when you're alone with yourself again, it can be frightening, but it's real. And only in the real can something new be born. The key is not more knowledge. It's less noise. It's the conscious decision to switch channels, from outside to inside. And yes, it'll confuse others when you no longer reply at once. Stop commenting on everything. Stop being constantly available. But you're not here to be torn apart. You're here to make an impact. And for that, you need focus. Non-negotiable. Reduce what distracts you. Clear space. Digitally, mentally, socially. Recognize what nourishes you and what merely entertains. And then decide. Do you want to remain a spectator of your own life or become its architect? The difference doesn't lie in talent, not in luck, but in your ability to concentrate. And that begins today, not with another goal, but by switching off everything that keeps you from finally getting started. Chapter 17. Your new life tolerates no excuses. There comes a moment when wanting is not enough. Dreaming about it, talking about it, even motivating yourself is not enough. You must decide. Do you really want this? Or are you just pretending? Because the path to a new life isn't paved with good intentions, but with uncomfortable honesty. And that honesty begins with one sentence. Enough with the excuses. You can excuse anything. Your fatigue, your stress, your childhood, your packed calendar, your bad experiences, your environment. You will always find a reason why it just can't happen now. And you'll even find people who validate you. They'll say, "You're right, it's understandable, it's human." And maybe they're even correct. But your new life doesn't care about understanding. It cares about decisions. Change is radical, not because it's loud, but because it allows no half-truths. You cannot grow while constantly hiding behind your shields. You cannot take responsibility while hiding behind circumstances. It's not about blaming. It's about reclaiming control by refusing to lie to yourself anymore. Nothing blocks your development more than your constant attempts to absolve yourself. I didn't have time, you say. No, you set your priorities. I couldn't have done otherwise. Yes, you chose not to change. I need more clarity? Perhaps. But clarity doesn't come from waiting. It comes from taking action. A new life doesn't emerge from comfort. It emerges where you make yourself uncomfortable. Where you begin to expose your excuses with consistency, not cruelty. Because as long as you placate yourself, you'll never wake up. As long as you keep explaining why things don't work, you'll never discover what would happen if you stopped justifying and started doing. Excuses are subtle. They don't always appear as flat lies. Sometimes they masquerade as self-care, reason, timing. But deep down you know when you're honest and when you're just saving your skin. You feel when you're shirking. You feel when you could, yet choose not to. And that moment of truth is uncomfortable. But it's also the beginning of everything. Your new life tolerates no excuses, not because it's harsh, but because it's real. Because it needs all of you, not the version that has perfected excuses, but the one that stands naked, the one that says, I'm scared, but I go anyway. I'm unsure, but I won't stop. I don't know everything, but I'll stop holding back. You won't move forward by hiding in loopholes, by negotiating your standards with your mood, by finding a reason every time displeasure knocks. The moment is never perfect, but it is here, and it won't wait. Commitment isn't something you feel. It's something you decide. It's the daily standing up for what you set out to do, even when no one's watching, when there's no reward, when it doesn't feel grand. And that very attitude shapes you. It makes you someone reliable, not outwardly, but inwardly. The best version of your life is not the one where you do everything right. It's the one where you stop spinning stories about why you're not ready. It's the one where you take responsibility, not out of guilt, but out of dignity. Because you owe it to yourself to be honest. Because you know you're not what you promise, you're what you do. And for that, you don't need all the answers. You don't need to know everything. But you must stop avoiding yourself. Stop living in excuses that keep you small. Your new life begins when you refuse to let your own excuses stand, no matter how plausible they sound. It will be uncomfortable. There will be friction with others, but above all with yourself. Because you'll see how often you've sabotaged yourself, how often you knew what to do and didn't. But that very moment is when you choose to stop doing it. Not from tomorrow, now. Not because you have to prove anything, but because you're ready to honor what you've always said matters. Because you're tired of postponing yourself. Because you sense there's more inside you, and you refuse to defer it any longer. Your new life doesn't wait. It tests you. It watches how you speak when no one's listening, how you act when it gets tough, and how you treat yourself when you fall. You will make mistakes. You will stumble, but you will make no more excuses. And that is the difference. Chapter 18. Greatness emerges in smallness. Every great change begins almost imperceptibly. Often as a blink, a barely audible impulse. A single moment when you decide, today, I do something different. No dramatic promise to the world. Just a quiet word to yourself. And yet, that is the beginning. When you think of big projects, a new life, your own business, a career switch, a relationship that lasts, you might feel the pressure. Everything must be grand, everything visible. But the real weight of that change doesn't come from one sweeping moment that tears everything away. It comes from 1,000 small daily choices that collectively create the rupture. It's not the yank that lifts you. It's the many small rhythmic pulls. The tiny occasions when you remember why you started. The conscious refusal of the easy path. The repeated choice to face what you could have fled. The countless times you stop losing yourself simply because no one's watching. Big things attract attention. They fascinate. They impress. But they grow in the shadows, where you don't let yourself be celebrated, where your will forms through repetition, where you work deeper than your mind can yet grasp. Let me put it differently. Every day you choose against the comfortable, you lay a brick. And each of those choices holds weight, even when you don't feel how much, even when there's no applause, even when you thought you'd need to move something huge before anyone would notice. But that's a fallacy. The real process runs in reverse. First you build quietly, thoughtfully, and one day you realize something stands. Greatness can't be called into being by a single moment. Greatness emerges when you stay small. Small, but deliberate. Small, but attentive. Small, but uncompromising. This path begins with getting up early, today. By giving up what holds you back. By focusing on what you truly want. By speaking your truth, even if no one hears it. Some call this nudging. I call it kairos in everyday life. The opportunities you seize because you've finally woken up, because you recognize today matters, not tomorrow, not next week, not when everything's just so. But now, it's uncomfortable, because you force yourself to do things that pay off slowly, to complete tasks you once deemed pointless, to seek conversations that challenge you rather than confirm you, to shape your life so you take it seriously, even if no one else reads it. By doing exactly that, you lay the foundation for something greater. You remove randomness from the process. You give it intention, and you begin to read your life, not as a string of coincidences, but as a path you walk, every day, step by step, unstoppable. Greatness on demand doesn't work, and that's a good thing. Because if it were easy, everyone would have it. If it came quickly, it would be fleeting. But you don't want fleeting. You want substance. And substance grows in the cycle of habit, in the quiet, within you, without glamour. When you get up a minute earlier today and resist distraction, you cement something, who you want to be. When you speak boldly because you sense an inner truth rising, you build a foundation. When you say no today so you won't be trapped tomorrow, you lay the next brick. And those bricks form walls or bridges, depending on what you build. If this still feels small to you, you may not sense its importance yet. But one night you'll wake and realize, all that is here, your body, your mind, your surroundings, your clarity, is precisely the product of these unremarkable choices. And then you'll feel, yes, that sustains me. I built that. And you won't merely begin. You'll carry on, upright because you authored it. Your new life is no firework. It's more like a beacon. And a beacon isn't born of a bang, but of endurance, of burning, by consciously lighting individual flames. And yes, if you're not deliberate today, you'll attribute tomorrow to chance or fate. But if you decide to shape it, then you'll see you've created what carries you. Greatness emerges in smallness. Don't understand this only intellectually. Feel it. Live it. In lukewarm days, in fatigue, in sluggishness. When you stay, when you take yourself seriously, when you remain consistent, then you'll sense, yes, here something is being built, without rush, without show, but unstoppable, over time, until it's there, your life, your foundation, your beacon, great, because you began small, and that's why it's authentic, and that's why it's truly yours. Chapter 19. Living with intention is no trend. Intention isn't an accessory. Not a filter you snap on because it suits a certain lifestyle this morning. It's not a hashtag, not a ritual that looks tidy and polished. It's no passing phase. If you want to live with intention, you must be ready to lose much. Speed, distraction, the illusion that you can please everyone. And that's where many drop out. Not because they don't want it, but because they're unwilling to pay the price that true clarity demands. Because the moment you start living with intention, everything shifts. Your attention, your language, your inner standard. It's no longer about how things look. It's about what they mean to you. And that isn't a trend. It's confrontation. With yourself. With your pace. With your story. Living with intention doesn't mean suddenly knowing everything. It means daring to stop reacting automatically. Not going along with every trend just because everyone else does. Making your choices not from impulse, but from conviction. And stopping the lie that you have no choice. You always have a choice. And that's precisely what makes intentional living so uncomfortable. Because it strips away your excuses. It confronts you with what you've chosen, even if you pretend it just happened. And it forces you to become honest. Not on Instagram, but where no one's watching, where you can no longer hide. Intentional living is slower, not because you become lazy, but because you become more precise. You no longer attend every event because you've learned that your no is protection. You no longer say yes reflexively when it pulls you away from yourself. You stop being everywhere because finally you're exactly where you belong, in your own life, with your own purpose, on your own frequency. And yes, that makes you uncomfortable for others, because you no longer swim with the crowd, because you don't share every opinion, don't try to please everyone. But you're not here to conform. You're here to make an impact. And that only happens when you sharpen your sensitivity to what matters. What am I doing right now? And why? When you live with intention, you don't ask what you should do. You ask, what serves me? What brings me closer to what truly matters? What's real and what's noise? And those questions pull you out of the mode where you merely drag yourself through the day, from meeting to meeting, from reaction to reaction, never pausing. Intention begins in the small, in your first thought upon waking, in how you treat yourself when you're tired, in the moment you ask whether you're heading toward purpose or toward distraction. You won't find an answer in a perfect plan, but you'll sense your inner compass shifting, because you feel again what aligns with you and what doesn't. There will be moments when you question everything, your pace, your path, your decisions. That's part of it, because living with intention is a constant realignment. It's not a state, it's an attitude, and it demands that you stay awake, that you don't let yourself be lulled by what appears easy but ultimately empties you. You will say no to things you once absolutely wanted. You will let go of what no longer fits, even if you once held on to it dearly. You will do less, but more mindfully. And you'll lose people, only to find yourself again. All this may sound like sacrifice, but in truth, it's liberation, because you begin hearing your own voice again. Not the expectations of others, not the voices of fear, not the constant external push. You hear yourself, and you start acting on that voice. This is not a trend. It's resistance against the unconscious, against being driven, against life on autopilot. And it takes courage. But that courage is rewarded. Not immediately, but with substance, with depth, with genuine inner peace. Not because everything is silent, but because you've stopped betraying yourself. When you live with intention, you're no longer a plaything. You become the actor. You don't wait for better conditions. You create them. Not perfectly, but consistently. And you'll realize suddenly that you need less to feel fulfilled. That your everyday doesn't have to be spectacular to hold meaning. That you don't need big successes to feel on track. You need clarity and the will to live it daily. Intention is not a lifestyle. It's your foundation. And you feel it in every step you take. When you walk awake again, eat with presence again, decide honestly again. And the more often you do, the clearer it becomes. You have arrived, not at the destination, but at yourself. Chapter 20. You will never be the same again. If you truly walk this path, with an open heart, clear decisions, the courage to let go of what kept you small, you will eventually realize there's no turning back. Not because you forbid it, but simply because you are no longer the person you once were. Not because you've achieved everything, but because you've changed in a quiet yet irrevocable way. You'll look back and wonder how effortlessly you hesitated back then. How often you held yourself back out of fear, comfort, or habit. How much you made yourself small without even noticing. And that is the proof. You've grown. Not dramatically, but palpably. You feel it in your thinking, in your posture, in the way you view things that once would have thrown you off course. Change begins quietly, and often the first signs go unnoticed. You may think it's just a new rhythm, a new priority, a new goal. But one day you'll find yourself in a situation that once terrified you, and you'll stay calm. Not because you've become braver, but because you no longer allow yourself to slip back into old patterns, old thinking, old self-images. You'll notice you speak differently, no longer to please others, but to be clear. You'll listen differently, no longer to react, but to truly understand. You'll ask different questions, not out of uncertainty, but out of genuine curiosity. And above all, you'll treat yourself differently. Not impatiently, not leniently toward your excuses, not so ready to placate yourself. You've learned to take yourself seriously, and that changes everything. Your surroundings will feel it too. Some will say you've changed, and they'll be right. You're no longer willing to lose yourself in shallow conversations. You don't want to belong just for belonging's sake. You no longer seek the validation that once propped you up, because you don't need it anymore. Not because you've got everything under control, but because you know who you are when no one's watching. You'll handle setbacks differently. You won't question everything just because something doesn't work immediately. You'll recognize that you can rebuild what once fell, and that this time you'll place it on firmer ground. You'll understand that setbacks no longer mean you failed, but that you're on a genuine path, one that challenges you and therefore shapes you. You'll learn to stand your ground even when it wobbles, not because you've grown harder, but because you've grown more honest, because you know you don't have to be perfect to be valuable, and because you've realized that everything you seek isn't out there but in your willingness to stay with yourself, even when it gets tough. You'll find you've grown quieter, not less passionate, but clearer. You won't react to every provocation. You won't fight just to be right. You won't act on reflex, but from conviction. And that's why your presence will feel different. Not louder, but stronger. Not flashier, but more genuine. And your goals will shift too. What once seemed crucial will lose importance. Not because it was wrong, but because you've grown. Because you see more deeply. Because you no longer confuse success with fulfillment. Because you've learned to orient yourself toward what truly nourishes you, not what distracts you. You'll no longer fear being alone. Not because you don't need anyone, but because you've found yourself. And you'll form other relationships with less neediness, more clarity, fewer masks. Because you refuse to bend just to avoid abandonment. Because you'd rather be truly alone than falsely together. And yes, you'll have moments when you miss the old you. When you wonder if it was simpler when you fit in more, before you questioned yourself so often. But if you're honest, you'll realize it was never simple. It was just habitual. And you no longer want the habitual. You want the real. You will not remain the same. And that's not a loss. That's the greatest tribute you can pay yourself. Because what you leave behind isn't just bad habits or old patterns. You leave behind the version of you that didn't know how much you could hold. Who believed she needed to shrink. Who thought she had to wait for rescue. But no one came. And you rose anyway. That's why you're here today. If you've listened this far, you're not the same person who started. Something has shifted. Maybe it was just a thought. Maybe a decision. But you feel it, and that's what counts. Thank you for taking the time to walk this path with me. If this audiobook has touched you, if it has sparked something inside you, then share it. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and pass it on to someone who needs to hear it right now. Because sometimes a single sentence at the right time is enough to change everything. I'll see you in the next chapter. And don't forget, you're no longer waiting for the moment. You're living it right now.